Hello, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I'm your host, Rrr and today I'm joined with Catherine Cooke. You've seen her on another video here on the channel. And Catherine Cooke, thank you so much for coming. You probably also know Catherine Cooke from the Phantasmagorium show, where she hosts her own show called Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns, as well as from the Unifying Force, where she also has a podcast there. And Catherine, thank you so much for joining us today to talk about Under the Helmet, the Legacy of Boba Fett.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Very fun.
Yes. Well, Catherine, I have to say, when I saw that they were announcing any sort of footage on the Book of Boba, or on just Boba Fett in general, rather, with the anticipation of the Book of Boba Fett coming up, I was just elated, and I had a lot of anticipation, but also just wondering what they would include in this small or short documentation of Boba Fett through the years, so to speak, because Boba Fett has been such an incredible character from the beginning and was incredibly popular right from the get-go, right?
Yeah.
And I know that in the documentary, we fortunately were treated with some amazing behind the scenes footage, some footage that I don't believe I've seen in quite some time, because it seems like while we are getting a lot of programming, we aren't necessarily always getting as much behind the scenes as I'd like to see. So this was such a treat. And, for a long time as a child, I remember the first time that I had ever seen Boba Fett, he was a fascinating person, but for some reason, I was quite scared of this character because he seemed to be, sort of in this group of people who could go ahead and pull out bounties. And I think that there was this perception for me that he was this incredibly ruthless and, determined character, and you couldn't run away from him. And I think that really added a lot to building, the Star Wars world, in the sense of someone who could traipse the entire galaxy and find you no matter where you are. What were some of your first memories when you were first introduced to Boba Fett?
I could tell that the fact that he's the one in the line of bounty hunters who Darth Vader actually singles out tells you that, okay, this isn't just your average guy. And he does look really very interesting type design to it. Like they said, it does have a bit of a medieval appearance to it, like through the visor. And I like that weathered this suit is. You feel that this guy's really been around the block a few times. And I also, even the design of his ship was really unique, and the sound effects, which we saw Ben Burt demonstrate on the documentary, and how that all came together. And so I admit, I thought he was a really great screen presence, but I don't feel they really gave it a payoff in the original trilogy. Because it's like, if you're going to have Vader tease no disintegrations, it's like, okay, that does its job of telling you that this guy's a badass compared to the others. And yes, he does succeed in turning the tide of everything that happens at the end of that movie. But it's basically from making an off-screen phone call, because after he's kind of just standing around after that, and he takes a couple pot shots at Luke, but I felt that even in Return of the Jedi, he's kind of, standing around a bit. And I like that they did the jetpack stunt on a cable bit for real. It was a little clunky, but I thought that was kind of neat and a little funny that he goes out almost like a joke onto itself. But that's a character that just kind of captivates your imagination. So of course they just expounded heavily on it in comics and books and games, and where he subsequently had so much more development and much more appearances than just in the 6.5 minutes in the films.
Yeah, I mean, you make an incredibly great point about this. For a character that appears for such a short time, he has gotten a lot of attention because there are other characters that had more screen time, but perhaps have not had that level of attention. And for me, I always look at Boba Fett as you remember how, the barge scene is about maybe 20 to 30 minutes in the film, but everybody seems to remember the barge, and they had that HasLab barge, and people were paying $500 just to get that barge because it was so important and had made such an impression. And part of the impression that it made, that added to it, was that, of course, the famous scene where Boba Fett falls into the Sarlacc pit. And so, it's been such an incredible debate. I mean, there are so many elements about it that are interesting, but there's been such a long debate as to what happened to him after he falls into the Sarlacc pit, and is he really dead? And then to kind of get the answer, in the Mandalorian, I think was kind of like such a wonderful thing. But then they also did us a favor by giving us so much information about him growing up in the Clone Wars. And after we saw him in the film as a young child, then we get to see some interactions, and he kind of like grew up in the school of hard knocks. I mean, Jango took great care of him. He showed him the way. He left him the manual that says, in case you encounter this person, this is what you do. But he was also taken advantage of a lot too. And I think that we got to realize that this young man is no ordinary man. We began to realize that he has incredible prowess and fighting ability that he must have learned or developed, from his father. And then, after making probably a lot of mistakes along the way, he's now at a point in his life where he's emerged from the pit, so to speak. And he's gotten his armor back, and he's ready to kind of like, do what he's always perhaps wanted to do, or maybe one of the million things he has on his list to do. But, I think it's interesting, about the fact that we really didn't know what he looked like for so long. And, the mystery and the absolute fascination with Mandalorians and Mandalorian culture has kind of added to this. I mean, I remember for many years, and I'm sure you remember, Catherine, about people debating whether or not he was a Mandalorian or not.
Yeah, that was a little weird because the comics had a really great history of the Mandalorians. It's like these super commandos that just went from planet to planet, destroyed everything they came into contact with. But then, Attack of the Clones didn't necessarily retcon that in and of itself, but it kind of came later in Clone Wars where they retcon it. When you go to Mandalore and you see that, okay, the fact that they're so pacifist now implies that maybe they did used to be a bit more of a warrior clan, because you have the offshoot Death Watch and things like that. But it was kind of funny. People go, "Oh, are you a Mandalorian or you're not?" And so in the series, when they decide that it's more of a creed than it is yes, on the one hand, you could be a Mandalorian, I suppose, by nationality, being born on the planet, but there's no actual species, so to speak, of it. So I like the idea that it is a creed and that they set that straight for the series. And I also loved it. At the time when Attack of the Clones came out, I remember being really excited for that because it seemed from the trailers that Jango Fett was going to pay off all the coolness of Boba Fett that you didn't get in the original trilogy, and he did. I thought Jango Fett was awesome. And it was so interesting that he decided that, I want an unaltered clone for myself. I'm like, really? That's a little odd, but it's also really interesting because Boba Fett obviously is growing up a very different life than Jango did. So he wouldn't, like, if you were to have both of those characters greet each other as adults, it would be very different, and then, of course, they, bring Boba Fett back in The Mandalorian, which is fantastic. And I'm still very intrigued as to, even more so than what the new canon history of The Mandalorians are going to be. Like, what was Boba Fett up to for those 5 years on Tatooine in the desert? It's like, that's really interesting. Like, he's keeping an eye on his armor, but he hadn't really gone for it yet. And he's just so almost like subdued or defeated, not quite defeated. He's just kind of living as a nomad. And I thought that's really interesting.
It is really interesting. And, you brought up so many good points. When I think about how, getting back to his father, Jango, and, I got the impression, or at least I would like to think that after seeing Jango request a clone of himself, and then after seeing children in that area where the children of the Watch were hiding, seeing so many children with Mandalorian helmets on, I get the impression that they value having children to pass on information and a legacy to. And so I really like that thought, that that's an important part for them. And it doesn't matter whether it's their biological children or not. All they care about is to have that next step, the idea that they live on, or their ideas and beliefs can live on in another generation.
Yeah, that's interesting, because Boba Fett, in a way, has those types of credo, or that code now that you see in the trailer for the Book of Boba Fett, and that you see even in The Mandalorian, especially in the second season. Whereas, Jango Fett, by contrast, we don't learn much about him in the movie that he's in, but we see that in the Clone Wars we meet all of his associates. And frequently when Boba Fett comes into contact with those people, they're like, "Oh, I knew your father. He was a great man." I'm thinking, well, a great good man as far as thieves and murderers are concerned, I guess, because they're not exactly really good people. And Jango playing both sides. Oh, I'll be the Republic Army template. I'll be the Separatist leaders, bodyguard and hitman. I don't care. And so I sense that Boba Fett does have a lot more honor, perhaps, than maybe Jango did, because, like Boba says in the trailer, when people ask what's going to make you any different from Jabba, he's like, well, I'm going to rule with respect, whereas Jabba ruled with fear. And you can really feel that too, and you get a lot of that from him in the second season of Mandalorian, that he's very much a changed man. I mean, yes, he's still intimidating, but not the type of intimidating you saw in the original trilogy, because there were so many unknown factors about him. He was so deadly, and if Darth Vader's going to single him out, then clearly this guy's somebody to be afraid of, whereas in Mandalorian, he almost feels a lot more approachable, And I wonder how much of that had to do with his experience in the desert for 5 years versus the fact that the original trilogy timeline doesn't really tell you much about what's going on under the helmet, so to speak.
Yeah, this is a good question. And you also make a very good point about that. He obviously has had to parlay quite a bit over the past 5 years just to survive. And it seems like Mandalorians have an incredible ability to survive in conditions that, others cannot thrive in. And so, I'm sure just like myself, you were not surprised to see Boba Fett in sort of, desert garb, if you will, fighting with that staff and using it to defend himself, or he probably could have gotten them all with that staff if he had to. But there was this very interesting element to it where he knew he had to have that armor, and the armor, I mean, obviously it's important for him for fighting, but it does have other value, because hidden inside, as we saw, was the chain code that had practically his family ancestry in it. And I really like that they showed us that element in it. Obviously, the technology in Star Wars was there, but I didn't even know that existed, Catherine, and I was really thrilled to see that part.
Yeah, that's something that this whole chain code thing is something they've introduced in the new series and stuff. Like it was in Rebels, or in Bad Batch rather, that once the Empire takes over, everybody has to have their chain codes, or otherwise, their ID cards. And so that's like, okay, that's kind of interesting that Boba keeps it like in his wrist gauntlet. So that's one of the reasons he wants the armor back. But he also mentions that he wants it back from a standpoint of honor, because it was my father's, therefore by rights it belongs to me. Which is interesting, because you didn't get that sense in Attack of the Clones or the Clone Wars, because in Clone Wars he's still young enough that he's not able to wear the armor yet, and we don't know where it is. He doesn't seem to be carrying it with him, and at one point in Clone Wars it seems that Slave One even got destroyed. Like when Ahsoka severs the wing and it crashes behind a mountain, and you see this giant explosion, but you don't see the aftermath. Or at one point even Boba Fett uses Jango's helmet as like a bomb, to hide a bomb rather, to try and kill Mace Windu. And so it's like, okay, I'm looking at Boba Fett's armor. Is that supposed to be the same helmet? Maybe not. Because in other versions, depending on which comics you read and which line of canon it is, it wasn't Beskar, or now they're making it might have been Beskar, which is a whole other new thing they've introduced to Mandalorian as well, to their whole culture. The idea that the Beskar armor itself is something extra special. It's not just the shape of it. It's extremely durable and very great currency.
It certainly is, and it certainly changed their culture dramatically, and perhaps made them, gave them that push. Sometimes there's a jump in sort of like an evolution in a culture, and perhaps the discovery of the Beskar could be used to explain why they were more successful in fighting. In addition to their fighting skills, having some of the best armor out there, could be something that they can use as an advantage over others. And then, getting back to what you were saying about how we learned more about Boba, I almost wonder if in the movie, although we see Jango as kind of leading the way for a good portion of the film, let's say from our point of view, I almost wonder if it was actually told from Boba's point of view, because it kind of felt like everything was happening to this child. And while I guess everybody could anticipate that Jango might not make the fight out, I almost wondered whether Jango felt or Boba felt, looking at things from his point of view, everybody felt it in the sense that you just killed my father, so to speak. And, that was actually, somewhat heartbreaking. And, considering that my impression of Jango and Boba was maybe on the line of neither good nor bad, somewhat neutral, I actually felt sorry for Boba at that point.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite shots in that movie, when he's just standing there after the battle holding his father's helmet. And it's like, you get it at that point. Like, even if they didn't do the Clone Wars TV series or expound upon it, you get why that guy's going to grow up to be, the badass bounty hunter and follow in his father's footsteps. And so that I really like that aspect of it, because you're right. Some of it is from Boba's perspective. It's like when we first meet Boba in the apartment on Kamino, it's like we know what the conversation between Obi-Wan and Jango is really about, because we've already seen what happened on Coruscant, whereas Boba's kind of looking around like, well, what's this? Kind of going from him. And then when Jango and Obi-Wan get in their fight on the platform, it kind of shows Boba's perspective as he's inside the ship, kind of looking at this. It's like, okay, what's this about? So then he just, I'm going to help out, just takes the guns and starts blowing them away. And how he's almost playful with his dad, like when they're chasing the starfighter and the asteroids, like, get him, Dad, get him, fire, that kind of stuff. And I always got the sense when Mace Windu decapitated Jango, you notice that he looks back up with a very angry look on his face, and I'm like, is he looking at Dooku? I would assume he's looking at Dooku, but Boba's up there and he's kind of hiding in a side alcove and watching. And I could see why. I thought it would have been great if they had a POV shot from Boba's perspective, looking at the look on Mace Windu's face as he's staring up, and he thinks, "Oh, you're staring at me. Like, you got a problem with me for some reason," which carries over into Clone Wars, because he wants to go on this whole revenge bender. But I like also there that he's not totally bloodthirsty, even like you see in that the last 2 episodes of season 2, that Aura Singh is the one who's really pushing him to do this, because she wants to collect the bounties and rake up the money, whereas Boba's not really as into it as he thinks he is. It's like he's doing it more so because, yeah, there's a little bit of the kid being mad about it, but some of it, like, he wants to honor his father, but he's not as much of a stone cold killer yet, so to speak. It's like when he fired on Obi-Wan on the platform, he did it because his dad was in trouble. He's not and you see throughout the Clone Wars how he starts becoming a bit harder and harder as they move through the saga. And the last time we see them, I believe, is when he was with his own little team that he started on this train heist thing with what's her name, Saj Ventress,
right?
And he's like really, a bit more hard and callous there, because they'd kidnapped that kid, and it's like, okay, so now you're really delving into some things that you really shouldn't be doing, and so we can see how it would kind of snowball from there. And currently, Lucasfilm is expounding further on Boba Fett's story with this. I think it's called More of the Bounty Hunters. That's chronicling Boba's journey from Bespin with Han's carbonite back to Tatooine and all the problems he encounters along the way, which is going to be a really great. I'm waiting to read it until they put out like an omnibus, and that'll be a really great series. But so I like how this character has been sort of, it's like they fleshed him out to make him more 3-dimensional, but I disagree with people who say, oh, it ruins the evil and the mystique of it. It's like, no, I don't think so at all. It makes him a lot more fascinating, because if you were just an average character in Star Wars and you had no idea who this guy was, you could film a movie or a TV show from such a person's perspective, and you still get all those old Boba Fett vibes, And I imagine we're going to be getting some of that even in this new series, from what we've seen in the trailer.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, he truly is a fascinating character. And, at a young age, we saw him in a position where he had to make decisions that no child should have to make. And, I really loved that, because it seems like for a lot of the series, he kind of, like, for example, Aura Singh, egging him on to do something that perhaps he really just didn't feel like doing that. And I think that, perhaps she told him, you have to strike now while, the man is there and it's a sign or whatever, behind the scenes. But she manipulated him, and he would have done anything that she asked him to do. So he truly, was not a grown up at that point, and he couldn't really make decisions the way that a regular adult would. And I'm sure, looking back at that now, he's probably thinking, okay, I got a raw deal, but he came out alive in it. And in the Star Wars galaxy, if you can make it out alive, you're halfway there as far as I'm concerned. But she also knew that he had such a huge legacy, and by binding herself to him, she could go places and do things that other people couldn't. And it's interesting when you talk about his association with Asajj Ventress, she's also a character who, starts off and down one path and then goes down a completely different one. And then oftentimes you're wondering, well, whose side is she on anyway? And the fact of the matter is that because she's a Night Sister, she could have ran her own show all, the whole time. She didn't need to be a follower for anybody. She should have just been, in my opinion, a leader, and just like the rest of the Night Sisters. But looking at this particular a documentary, and it is a short documentary, but I have to say, Catherine, it's filled with so many things. For example, we get to see the original suit, which was white, and I have never actually seen the original suit, nor have I even heard George Lucas talk about the original suit, and I really liked seeing that. I think when he talked about how he developed the character, and just at that particular time, just each step along the way, even having it in that parade, and the appeal of Darth Vader being there and Boba Fett being the next choice that they would have in the parade. I think it was a foreshadowing of how popular that character was going to be. But another thing that I really liked about it was that, they talked about how mysterious he really was in the beginning. We waited a long time to find out anything about Boba Fett, didn't we?
Yeah, because he first debuted officially at the Marin County Parade. I admit most of the stuff in the documentary I've known about for a long time. Like, I've seen those pictures, I've seen the footage, and how great it is. But it's like, aside from the parade, he also, like, to the masses, debuted in the cartoon from the holiday special.
Yes.
People are like, "Who's this guy? He's like really intimidating. He's kind of scary." And so when they made the decision to change it from being just a random Imperial super commando to being the bounty hunter, because hey, we need a design for this character. Oh, let's pick this. It was so great, and I imagine that the reception to that character at the parade had something to do with it as well, as much as it had an effect probably to put him in the holiday special, because obviously the kids are going to be excited to see Star Wars characters, and they're going to be asking, "Oh, who's this?" And they're like, "Oh, well, we're not sure yet." And I love those little funny stories too. Like, we need to give him a cape. Well, we don't have one. Oh, we'll just grab this Star Wars towel. I'm betting there's going to be a lot of cosplayers dressed like that at Celebration next year. But
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised that they follow that path, and just just for kicks and giggles, so to speak, and of course that the famous rocket situation with having to return those toys, or the dangerousness of those toys, made it an incredibly popular collector's item.
Yeah, and I still to this day don't really get how that came about, because there have been other toys over the years which have the same type of projectiles. I mean, more likely you would be afraid of losing it when you fire it, because they shoot out so fast and they're so small. But it's like very sought after, even though they never did officially release it. And I love seeing the glimpses of Steve Sansweet's collection, because Rancho Obi-Wan's not far away from me over in Petaluma. I haven't been there yet, but the stuff he's got there is just amazing. And he comes to Celebration all the time with a small sampling of what he has, which is pretty cool. But yeah, the one of the tidbits I was surprised by in the documentary is when they played the old interview with Daniel Logan as a kid on the Camino set. I remember seeing that clip back on the DVD in 2002, and he's looking at the dictionary, the Star Wars Visual Dictionary, and he's kind of excited to see the stuff there. I didn't realize that was the first time he'd ever even heard of Boba Fett, because you would think that if a kid has seen Star Wars or familiar with it, of course he's going to know who Boba Fett is when you tell him. But they clarified in the documentary that when they gave him the dictionary and he saw that, it was his first time seeing it. Like that. So that's really interesting that they're auditioning kids who don't, maybe they did that deliberately, find kids who don't know who Boba Fett is so they can play him just as like a character and not as like, "Oh my God, it's Boba Fett," that kind of thing, which is a bit interesting.
Yeah, and it makes sense. You don't want someone who's starstruck on the set, as they're trying to kind of like just be like it's his father.
Yeah.
And so and it is very interesting too that, and in regards to the jetpack, of course it was incredibly satisfying to see I think, I can't remember the guy's name, if it was Cobb Vanth, who wore the jetpack, and he uses it once in The Mandalorian. And then
been waiting so long to see that original jetpack it used. In Attack of the Clones, they gave Jango a different looking jetpack. I'm like, oh, okay, and he fires it, but I'm like, no, I want to see that classic Boar missile get fired for a change.
That's right. It was so satisfying, and then on top of that, we get to see, Boba actually do it. Like, it was just like heaven. And I said, I can't believe what I'm seeing. I had to keep telling myself, you just saw him fire the missile twice. One person fired it and then Boba fired it. Like it was just so incredible. And, you know, it was actually kind of like waiting for something to happen for so many years. It just really was, it just really was groundbreaking as far as I'm concerned, considering everything we know about the history of the character. But another thing that I kind of think is interesting is, you know, and as you know, we never really saw who Boba Fett was under the helmet. And, you know, they named this Under the Helmet, The Legacy of Boba Fett. Now that we have, you know, Tamora Morrison, who was, of course, cast as Jango and consequently Boba, you know, things changed a little bit for me in regards to how I looked at Boba Fett. I mean, I knew there was a man under this thing, Catherine. I knew this all this time. But now that I could see this person and, you know, kind of have some sort of association with, you know, a human being, more or less, because he didn't have the armor on at that point, I really took a different look to him. And, you know, he kind of seemed like someone who was displaced almost. When we
His
see him,
backstory in the expanded universe is very good.
yeah.
And I wish they'd retained it, but most of it, as I understand, has been retconned by Clone Wars because they changed the entire backstory of the Mandalorians.
Yes. And so, you know, now we have a character who I personally think, you know, and I don't know whether this is going to happen, but and you know what's kind of interesting and what I'm trying to get at is that we saw that he had tension with other Mandalorians. And I suspect, and I'm not going to say it's true, but that a lot of Mandalorians may have a lot of tension with Boba. Now, I understand it. You know, each person, you know, each Mandalorian has their own point of view as to how they should live their life. But I suspect that Boba probably will want to find other Mandalorians that he can, you know, bond with in a way. But I have a feeling that he's not going to ever get that. And it saddens me in a sense because I've grown to accept him as a Mandalorian, and that, you know, his approach to life, while it was very turbulent, is not atypical of a Mandalorian when they're kind of like a warring people. So, you know, I kind of would have liked for him to have found a group, kind of like how Din Djarin had a group. And, you know, he had people who cared about him. And, you know, through the course of his, you know, trials and perils, all of a sudden there's there's another heavy duty Mandalorian. He's got your back, you know, or, you know, Bo-Katan, she's got your back here. You know, I kind of wish that Boba had that, but I suspect we may not get that, you know, or he may not find that immediately. And it's a little disheartening because I think it's like, it's important to their culture in a sense to have clanship, to have that clanship. What do you think?
I'm not sure, because it's like in the trailers for the show, he's trying to build up a whole criminal empire again, and it reminded me a lot of this episode of Clone Wars where Maul goes around to assemble the Shadow Collective, and he's kind of doing the same thing, but I'm not sure to what end. Is he just, like he says, oh, if we work together, we can make a lot of money? And it's like, okay, but do you just want to be the boss just because, or are you going to use this to maybe try and help out Mandalore? What exactly is going on here? And I imagine that he's going to come into conflict with Din Djarin over this at some point, because now that Din Djarin has his own problems with the Darksaber and Bo-Katan, whereas I can see why the other Mandalorians don't really like him, because he was orphaned at the age of 10 and has kind of been doing his own rogue thing since then, whereas they're much more about being a part of the clan and, you know, honoring their family line, all that kind of stuff. And it's like, yes, Boba feels honor towards his father, but because his father as a Mandalorian wasn't really interested in helping Mandalore's cause, he's like, nah, I'm just going to go be the clone template for this. I'm going to help this. I'm not going to be involved with Death Watch or Children of the Watch or any of that stuff. And so they kind of resent Boba for that, because he's also kind of walked his own path and being the right-hand man, one of the go-to guys for Darth Vader, who's obviously one of the major oppressors of the Empire, being a major oppressor of the Mandalorians. And you can see why they don't really like him very much.
Mm-hmm. And also another factor, which you've already mentioned, I think earlier, is the fact that he's the face of these clones. And they remember, you know, they made a point of Bo-Katan saying, I remember that voice so well, you know. And of course, to her, you know, all those years of having to fight these clones, she readily associated him with a clone and nothing more. And he is actually a clone, but you know what I mean. Yeah. She associated him with, you know, the clones that were that were fighting against her. And I don't think she's I don't think he can live down that association.
Probably not, but good for him that he doesn't care. I mean,
Yes.
they're still going to look at him that way, but they seem to have a reluctant partnership at the end of season 2 a little bit. But I do wonder, because I like you said, it's like, is he going to come to blows with them? Is he seeking that out? Because the fact that, I mean, we still don't know exactly where the Book of Boba Fett is going to start in terms of when we last saw him in season 2, he takes off in Slave One after doing his part, and I guess he doesn't return to, check in with Din Djarin and Bo-Katan. Maybe not. I guess he just leaves and goes back to do his own thing. I'm not really sure. So that'll be interesting to see right off the bat at the start of the first episode how that goes down. But I imagine that Bo-Katan wouldn't care less about not seeing him again. But I think it might become a problem for them, because if he is assuming that he is very successful at starting up his own regime, which I think he will be, then that's going to naturally come into. It seems a given that that's going to come to blows at some point. I even heard a rumor that, or a report which suggested that the 8 episodes of the Book of Boba Fett would be styled as chapters 17 through 24, whereas The Mandalorian was, the first 16 chapters, and it's like, okay, even though season 3 won't start until probably the spring, that's probably going to start with chapter 25. So if this holds true that it's 17 to 24, then they are emphasizing that yes, his story and what he's doing is still very much involved and related to Din Djarin's overall story and whatever conflict he's getting into now. So I imagine that's going to be what Boba Fett is doing, and what he's creating is going to be a whole other faction in this sort of fight for the Darksaber, fight for the Throne of Mandalore type thing. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes, because now it'd be interesting to go back to Mandalore now we're in a post-Empire world, because we saw what it looked like in the Clone Wars. We have an idea from Rebels what it looks like during the Empire's rule. So it's kind of, I'd imagine they're at a point where they're trying to struggle to define themselves in this new, Brave New World type thing. And so you got Bo-Katan and Din Djarin having their beef, but now you got Boba Fett building this whole empire over there. It's like, yeah, you kids go fight and decide amongst yourselves. Well, I'm going to be building up that could be where they're going with this. Like, okay, they're going to squabble and have their own personal problems with their culture over the Darksaber, whereas he's going to be possibly the bigger problem they have to deal with, because he is very intelligent, and like he's not acting on impulse. Like, you could tell he has a plan. I assume it's not just money. It's like, yeah, to the lesser goons that he's recruiting, making more money. Of course they're going to love that idea, but I get the sense that Boba's after something else.
I agree with all that. And I also agree he's after something else. And, to be honest with you, one of the things I'm most looking forward to is more fighting, because I can't get enough of these fighting scenes, Catherine. So, I want to see Boba use his skills again. I want to see Fennec use her skills again. I want to see full out, battles. And
well, we saw how brutal it was even in season 2 when he brings the gaffy stick down on the stormtrooper, and that stormtrooper had a helmet on and it shatters it. Well, you see a clip in the trailer where he's using the gaffy stick and bringing it down on somebody who doesn't have a helmet on. I'm like, oh wow, so it's going to be pretty brutal.
I certainly hope so. And, because we've actually had a lot of animated versions of fights with Mandalorians, and they've been great, and I've enjoyed that sort of thing. But, I have to be honest with you, The Mandalorian really kind of gave me an appetite for more of this. And that's where I think that the Mandalorian series, rang true to The Mandalorian in a sense, when we get to see fighting scenes like this, because if you recall, when they first started to advertise The Mandalorian, Baby Yoda was not in the picture, was not advertised, and everybody thought we were going to get, somewhat of a battle style Mandalorian series, and we were kind of thrown for a loop. And I'm not upset about this at all, but we were when Baby Yoda kind of popped up in the picture because it was so unexpected. And if they were going to throw in something, Catherine, as unexpected as Baby Yoda, what do you think might be in the Book of Boba Fett that they could throw us a loop for?
I think it might be another bait and switch, because I honestly didn't care for the trailer very much, because, again, it was emphasizing pretty much that, okay, he's building a collective of some kind. Okay, but I imagine he's not going to be doing that in every episode throughout all 8 episodes. It's not probably going to be him going from place to place for all 8 episodes. So I figure there'll be another type of bait and switch in terms of what the story is going to end up more or less surrounding. I mean, I imagine that Din Djarin will show up at some point. Again, like I was mentioning, some type of conflict about this, rather than the whole season just being him build, or if it is the whole season just him building up the collective, then it's got to be, there's going to be something else there, because that would get a bit repetitive. Admittedly, season 2 of Mandalorian got a little bit repetitive with the whole formula of you go to a planet to follow a lead, and oh, you help me, I'll give you the information you want, and follow the next planet, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that could potentially be, because I know fans were still upset about the bait and switch from Mandalorian, that, oh cool, it's going to be a rogue, you know, a rogue Mandalorian traveling the galaxy. Oh, and now it's the yeah, babysitting. So maybe Boba Fett will actually fill in some of those, or the Book of Boba Fett will fill in some of those fan desires to have a more rough and tumble type, you know, ruffian type storyline to benefit, rather than, you know, the whole lone wolf and cub thing they're going for with Mandalorian.
And also, we have to assume, although, you know, I have to state this, although it's probably, you know, people know this, that Boba probably does have enemies out there. And so, you know, I don't know them. I don't know who, you know, we don't really know. But what I do know is that from the altercation we saw with Casca Reeves, Boba's going to have to defend himself. And, you know, I think they were telling us, you know, that once people see who he is by the recognizable armor, and then when he takes his helmet off and they recognize his face, he's just going to be, you know, fighting battles on every front. And, you know, I hope that we do see a lot of the fighting. That's what I really would like. You know, I want to see armor smashed. I want to see, you know, blood spilled. I want to see all that crazy stuff, and just the abilities come out, especially with this great team that Fennec and Boba seem to have made.
Yeah, well, I can see him and Din Djarin becoming enemies again, potentially, because, like you said, if he can't live down that reputation of who he is, and the fact that he obviously isn't going to make any apologies for it, then depending on how much of an issue the Mandalorians take with what he's doing, if that comes to be another conflict and Din Djarin is still in the mix, then that could be another coming to blows about that, because you're right. It would be very, I can't picture him sitting on the throne of Mandalore at any point because of that history and that reputation that he has. Whereas if that's what he's gunning for, then he will come into conflict either with Bo-Katan or Din Djarin. And I can picture him easily telling, like, if Bo-Katan and Casca Reeves and another guy were to show up and, you know, starting to give him shit about it, he'd be like, yeah, whatever, I don't care. It's like, I'm not raised into your cult, you know? It's like, I have my own honor that was bestowed upon by my father. I'm doing my own thing. So, you know, bye-bye. You're just gonna, and I expect the fan, because you can't do a whole Boba Fett series where he's just being the good-natured, honorable guy the whole time. It's like, no, he's you're gonna see a little bit of the old school Boba Fett. I would not be surprised if they do bring in other bounty hunters, such as maybe Cad Bane even. I mean, who knows how, yeah, that character's an alien, so who knows, he could still be around, why not, you know? Or the people, all the other bounty hunters who may still be alive from, the War of the Bounty Hunters storyline, you know, all the ones who are upset with him. I imagine that because he's worked for Darth Vader for so long, he's got other rebels who are still upset with him, and that could be another challenge to him potentially. If he does have good intentions with whatever he's trying to do with this collective, I feel that could corrupt it. It's like, yeah, I tried to do good, but you know, you people are just, you know, getting in my way too much. I don't really care anymore. So I picture that he'll still be attaining his old rogue spirit, because even with what he's doing here, I'm having a real hard time picturing him just being the guy who sits on the throne while lording over some, you know, criminal racket for. It's like, okay, so I think that'll be whatever the big surprise is. Will probably have something to do with whatever his true end game is.
Well, I agree with you, and I think the Twi'leks will have something to do with it. Now, I'm not quite sure why I get this impression, but I was just intrigued when they showed the Twi'leks kind of, you know, eyeballing him. And well, first of all, everybody's been eyeballing him because they're wondering, they know it can't be this simple as you stated, but I have a feeling that they have something or some other secret about them that we don't know about. And, you know, this is at least what I'm hoping for, Catherine.
I know he used to flirt with Jabba's Twi'leks.
Yes. And I have a feeling that they have a little bit more power than we've been led to believe or have been shown, let's say, in live action so far. And I certainly hope we see a little bit of that going forward as well, since they made a point of, you know, singling them out. We got a lot in the trailer. And, you know, in regards to, I also would just want to talk a little bit about Tamora Morrison, because he seems to have transformed this character and pretty much a good portion of Star Wars, with his face and his presence. And, you know, he's a great guy, you know, in all these interviews I've seen him in, he's really nice. but there is this intrigue with his actual cultural background, and the sense of this warrior cultural significance. I think he was one of the best castings they ever made in the series since the original cast. And I honestly think that he's improved the appeal. Not that it needed any improvement, but if you had to pick anybody to play Boba Fett, he would be the person that I would have chosen. How about you?
Absolutely, because George Lucas's directing did not do him any favors in Attack of the Clones. Everything was so wooden in that. Whereas if you've seen him in other films like Once Were Warriors, he's amazing
Yes.
in that movie.
Yes.
And whereas in Clones, Attack of the Clones, he's just kind of it's like okay. Whereas now you see what he's really bringing to the role of Boba Fett in the series, and it was just so good. And it's like okay, now I could really see where, and it's not just a matter of what he does with his face and his acting, but even when he has the helmet on, you can tell from his body language, the way he moves, the way he goes through it. It's just really, and he can totally sell the whole, as fans have lovingly called it, the whole dad bod thing from the second season when he shows up and just, wrecks shop, and it doesn't matter that the armor doesn't really fit him very well. People are just like, it's Boba Fett,
Well, it added to the realism, didn't it? I mean, he wasn't going to be this, people change over time, and it's been a certain amount of time, and we're not expecting to see the exact same person. He can't be the same person after everything that he's been through. And I really like that, it's that sense of realism, and certainly, his age and the timing has worked out very well in this regard. But, I think that adds something to it. And along with this older Boba Fett, we're expecting a more wise Boba Fett to come through with this. And I think that there is a lot of great expectations as to what he may be able to accomplish, or at least try to push forward. And for the first time in a long time, I've often thought, now I had always assumed or got the impression that he was a bad guy, let's say, and he did dirty jobs and he had to do these jobs. But, there might be some other plan that he has in mind, as we've discussed. And I can't help but thinking of the armorer in The Mandalorian, who seemed to know so much, or let's just say maybe, Djarin didn't get a chance to get all the information from everyone. He's been out in the field, doing whatever he was doing. And she may be, from what I've heard, maybe somebody from Death Watch, because of her helmet and the shape of the helmet, and the horns look like they could be, a Darth Marion, horns, so to speak. But I have to wonder about it, because a Mandalorian can be anybody. So I just really wish we could find out a little bit more about the armorer, because she's the one who had been holding that clan together, and they must have escaped to somewhere. She kind of salvaged things, and I'm hoping that we might find out a little bit more about that. And I think that if Din went to her, let's say, after being in contact with Boba, she may have heard of Boba Fett, because he's such a famous bounty hunter throughout the galaxy.
Yeah, I have a feeling she could be a villain in season 3, because she's not going to be happy about his affiliation with Boba Fett, because he's helped the Empire persecute the Mandalorians and wipe them out. She's not going to be happy with the fact that he's no longer following the rules of their sect. Like, he doesn't, like, she took it very seriously when she asked him, when she first met him, about, have you taken off your helmet before? Has this ever happened? He's like, never, not in combat. And now he's actually done it. And he's not just that, but he's completely shed the whole Children of the Watch aspect. He's almost like Brave New World now, because like he's been